Hello everyone, Jai Hind and good morning. Welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IS in English. My name is Bhanwar Singh, MXNDA 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012. And I welcome you on the platform. So let's see if you're live. Please type in the message and let me know that you're watching this session live along with me. And once again, we'll be doing the Hindu analysis where we'll be talking about the important articles which had been featured in our today's The Hindu in the Delhi edition. And we'll be talking about how they are relevant to our preparation for the UPSC as well. So that is what we will be covering in today's session. So please type in the message and let me know that you're watching this session live along with me on the platform. All right. So let's start and let's move to the important articles that we'll be talking about in today's session. The first of the news or the article that we'll be talking about is about the Strait of Hormuz crisis once again. All right, we have seen that again. Once again, there are the fresh attacks which had been there from both the sides, whether it is US and from the Iran as well. And thereby, there had been a ship which had been stuck, and ultimately we have lost one of the Indian as well. Good morning, political science. Tenu, good morning. So ultimately, this is about the seafarer safety as well. And that is why this is quite important news that we'll be discussing today. Then moving ahead, we'll be talking about trial in the absentia under the BNSS. This is about the Hafiz Saeed case that had been filed in the Jammu and Kashmir by the NIA or the National Investigating Agency. Then we'll be talking about India-UK CETA as well, which actually gets operationalized today itself. That is on 15th of July. Then we'll be moving ahead and we'll be talking about the Bhojshala Kamal Mola dispute as well, where there had been interim order that had been provided by the Supreme Court. Then we'll be talking about the 3-language formula as well, where the Supreme Court have asked about whether the English can be termed as the native language. Then we'll be talking about India's Indo-Pacific consolidation, where there is an editorial related to Australia and New Zealand. And then we'll be talking about India-US defense technology ties as well, where it is about the ambition as compared to the delivery. Again, there is an editorial that we'll be talking about. Cloud Shinobi, good morning. All right, so these are the important articles that we'll be talking about in today's session. But before that, let's see what are the important quotes that you can use. Now, there is an observation by the Supreme Court that had been made yesterday. And this is, the first quote is directly from that observation. That is, the protection of the liberty cannot remain dependent upon the temporal boundaries of the court schedules. In a constitutional democracy governed by the rule of law, the Constitution cannot fall silent at night, nor can the protection of liberty await the morning bell of the courts. Now, over here, this observation had been made by the Supreme Court, and again, this is quite important because ultimately Supreme Court said that there will be SOP or the standard operating procedure that will be laid down while there are the infringers of the liberties which are involved. So let's see what will happen and how this SOP, it will guide the future cases. Now, the second one is also quite important because this is about a loss of the life that we have seen in the Strait of Hormuz, and this is the safety of the people shall be the highest law. Now, this quote is by Marcus Tullius Cicero, and this is again quite important because you can use this while you are talking about the Strait of Hormuz crisis. You can also use this when you are writing about the right to life and property. That is when it comes to Article 21. So these two are the important quotes that you can use, and this is the word that we have for today. The word for today is gaffer. This is an elderly man, a person who exercises control over the workers, or he may be boss or superior as well. So we need to ask the gaffer if we can leave early today. That is the usage of this particular word that had been given. Now, let me tell you that today is the last day for the offer that we are giving you, and that is you are getting today the lowest price drop, and this will end today itself. So again, you can enroll into any of the courses which are available on the platform of StudyIQ IS, and ultimately you have to use the code that is BRS Live. Then only you will be able to get this offer that is there in front of you. Now, coming to the first news that we have for today, it is again about the Strait of Hormuz and the crisis that we are seeing once again. Now, this is quite important because US have struck fresh waves of the you can say invasion or the fresh waves of the attacks had been launched on the coastal defense, even the missile and the drone sites on 14th of July. At the same time, when it comes to Iran, Iran have retaliated by hitting the tankers which had been there in the Strait of Hormuz. We have MT Al-Bahia and MT Mombasa, which had been stuck or they had been hit in the Strait of Hormuz. Accordingly, because of these, good morning epics, because of these, fresh attacks, there had been one of the Indian soldier which was killed and several of them had been injured among the nearly 46 crew which were there on the ship. Now, India have summoned the Iran's deputy chief of mission and registered a strong protest as well. At the same time, when it comes to the crisis that we are seeing right now, so there is another news that you will find in the Hindu that says that the President Trump had first announced and then he had scrapped a 20% of the US reimbursement fee on Hormuz shipping. And now he have replaced it with the trade deals with the Gulf states which are there. The shipping ministry had ordered also a real-time seafarer first tracking dashboard and liaison officers for every Indian crew member that is in the Gulf. That is also a welcome step for the safety of the seafarers which are there in the Strait of Hormuz that are, currently in the region. So, of course, once again, you can see that the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very important geopolitical choke point, it is in the news. And ultimately over here, you can see that this is the Strait of Hormuz that connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman. And here we have two different, you can say the territorial waters. There is the territorial waters of Iran, and in the south, we have the Omani territorial waters which are there. Now, the problem is, the problem started when there was the shipping that resumed, and ultimately there were the fresh attacks over the, the transit of the ships into the region. And thereby the US have retaliated. Then again, Iran is retaliating, and let's see where this complete thing it will move forward to. But again, this is quite important because this is a very important geopolitical tension that we are seeing right from the 28th of February when the things started escalating between US and Iran. Over here, this is quite important for India as well because ultimately this is India's carefully, where it is balancing itself. There is the non-alignment that you can see that India is not aligning with the US or the Iran and even with the Gulf partners as well. So this non-alignment stance that India has, it is quite important because without taking or without appearing to take sides in the conflict is quite important for India and its future aspirations with the Gulf nations as well. Now, when it comes to the oil price and even the freight insurance, they will be rising. All right, they will be rising again, and ultimately they will raise the India's import bill. That will have the implication on the current account deficit, and also it could stroke the imported inflation as well. So thereby, this is quite important economically as well, as we have seen previously as well, where the economic scenario they have deteriorated for India after the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Then socially it is also quite important because acute welfare and the safety concerns are there for the lakhs of the Indian seafarers who crew the world's merchant fleet, and ultimately the seafarers which had been stuck in the Strait of Hormuz, they are at the stake right now. Also, when it comes to the environmental factors, you can see that there is a risk of the oil spill in the ecological sensitive and heavily trafficked maritime choke point. Therefore, this pertains to the environmental implication as well. And also there is the ethical implication where it is the state's duty of care and the diplomatic protection which the state it owes to the citizens which are working abroad in the high risk zones, and thereby this has the ethical implication as well. Now, this is quite important over here when we are talking about this complete crisis that is, there in the West Asia or in the Strait of Hormuz, because ultimately building strategic petroleum reserves and diversifying the crude resources, that is, we are now taking the crude oil from the US, Russia and Africa as well, that actually reduces the single corridor dependence that India should move forward to. Now, there is a standing, there should be reviving of the Chahbar INSTC corridor as well. Now, because ultimately this will give India a westward alternative that will bypass the Hormuz-linked risk and the crisis as well. There should be a standing seafarer, welfare protocol. Now, there should be the real-time tracking of the seafarers. There should be proper insurance, the evacuation drills that must be practiced, and this should be institutionalized. There is a welcome step where the Indian government have launched real-time tracking of the seafarers, but at the same time, this should be institutionalized and not improvised as per the crisis. And the diplomacy, it must stand firm on protecting our nationals while avoiding any kind of confrontation or entanglement in the war that India has right now, no strategic stake in escalating. So therefore, this should be the India's stance when it comes to the complete West Asian crisis that we are seeing right now. So over here you can see that this is where we have the Chabahar port, and India has a quite strategic stakes in the Chabahar port, because ultimately that will link India to the, we have in Iran, we have Zahedan, then Zaranj, and then it will also link to the Afghanistan as well. Then there is the INSTC corridor as well. This is the right now that the route that we take when it comes to, going to Russia or to the St. Petersburg. This is the route that India takes, or the shipping vessels they take, that they pass through the Red Sea and then through the Mediterranean Sea, and ultimately by, navigating from the Atlantic Ocean, then they, they move towards Russia. Now there are the news of the Russia as well, which have also stopped its trafficking or maritime traffic because of the drone attacks by the Ukraine. So ultimately this route is quite fragile. So this is the INSTC that had been proposed, where it goes from India to the Chabahar port, then from Iran, then passing through the Azerbaijan and ultimately connecting to Russia. So now this is quite important that India should move ahead, and India should build the INSTC corridor as well. Now coming to the next news that we have, again it is quite important, and it is about a trial in absentia. So like I said that when it comes to NIA, National, we have the special NIA court that is there in Jammu. It has issued a non-bailable warrant against Hafiz Saeed, who is the Lashkar-e-Taiba chief in the Pahalgam terror attack case. And the NIA, it will seek the trial in absentia, that is under the section 356 of BNS, that is Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, which have replaced the CRPC or the Criminal Procedure Code that we had. Now, Saeed, he had been charge sheeted individually and as the chief of the Lashkar-e-Taiba and its proxy, TRF or the Resistance Front under the BNS and even the UAPA 1967 for waging war that was against India or during the Pahalgam terror attack. Now, Saeed is unlikely to appear before the Indian court. So, ultimately the case, it will test the BNS's first codified framework for the absentee trials or the trial in absenteeism. So this is quite important. Again, we have when it comes to the old CRPC or the old code that we had. So the old CRPC, it had the provisions which were under the sections 82, 299 and 307. They allowed for the proclamation, property attachment and the evidence recording in absence. But again, over here there was that there could be no full-fledged in absentia trial that was there under the old CRPC. But now we have the BNS. Under the BNSS section that we have 356. Now this Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, it replaced the CRPC, and ultimately over here this is a wholly new provision that will permit the complete trial including the judgment. Now this could happen in the absence of the proclaimed offender. Please remember. Now who is the proclaimed offender? This has been, defined under the section 84, clause 4 of the BNSS, and it is about one accused of an offence which is punishable with more than 10 years or life imprisonment or even with death. Now, if he fails to appear despite the proclamation, then he would be called as the proclaimed offender. So this is quite important because you can connect this to the right to free trial that is under Article 21, the inferred right that had been provided by the Supreme Court. You can link this with the overall of the complete criminal law, where we have BNSS, BNSS and even the BSA, which were codified in 2023 and replaced the IPC, CRPC and even the Evidence Act that was there in India. Now this is quite important because ultimately this is where you will see that it will test India's cross-border counter-terror diplomacy and its ability to signal the accountability despite that there is no extradition treaty that we have with Pakistan. All right, at the same time, when it comes to the economic scenario, you can see that the prolonged non-cooperation by harboring the states that imposes the indirect cost that is there, because ultimately, because of the terrorism, there are the trade which gets disrupted, and ultimately the aid and the counter-terror financing trafficking that is also that requires the economic push as well. Now, coming to the social perspective, this offers a measure for the closure and the acknowledgement to the victims and the families of the terror attacks, even if there is no physical custody. So this is quite symbolic as well. And at the same time, there is the ethical perspective where it balances the accused right to a fair trial, where we have the state-funded counsel that is provided. There is 90-day wait as well after the NBW or non-bailable warrant is issued, and there is cross-examination rights which had been provided against the victim's right to the timely justice, and therefore this is quite ethical. You can see the ethical perspective over here as well. All right, now this is quite important because there are the procedural safeguards which are given. Now, the trial in absentia, or when we have the, we have the victim, the accused who is not present in the court. So over here, there are certain safeguards which had been provided so that this clause, it is not used, you can say this clause is not used against someone. All right, there are the proper safeguards which had been provided. Like, for example, there has to be 2 warrants that has to be issued 30 days apart. Then there should be a published notice as well. Then also there is a mandatory 90-day wait period that has been prescribed. And then there is a state-appointed defense lawyer, and this shows that the law was drafted with the fairness and not just for the speed in the mind. Also, this is quite important because yet a conviction in absentia, it carries very limited practical force without the extradition. So its value is basically diplomatic and symbolic, which actually reinforces India's counter-terror record internationally, and the provision that we have, it should be read alongside with India's effort of the multilateral designation that is under the UNSC 1267 and the FATF linked pressure on the safe havens as well. So this is you can link this with the India's forces, or where India is actually moving ahead, and its effort for the counter-terrorism force that should be there, or the counter-terrorism efforts globally as well. Now, coming to the next news that we have for today is it is about India-UK trade, your CETA, that will come into impact, or it will be implemented right from today itself. Now, we have the CETA, or the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, that had been signed, and even DCC, that is Double Contribution Convention. It will come into effect right from today onwards, and UK over here, it will immediately eliminate the tariffs on, please remember, 96.8% of the tariff lines, where it is about 97.7% of the trade value, and India will also eliminate the tariffs, but that will be on 30.3% of the trade value. Now, there will be 47, but ultimately this will be in a phased manner. All right, right now, immediately will be ending, or will be eliminating the tariffs only on 30.3%, whereas UK will be ending or eliminating the tariffs on 96.8%. For UK, it will be immediate. All right, but at the same time, for India, there will be a phased manner where we'll be moving ahead from 30.3% to 47% that had been decided. Also, when it comes to DCC, so it will exempt the India's mobile workforce that is there in UK from double social security contributions for the 5 years, and it will benefit nearly about 75,000 of the workers and even more than 900 of the employees which are there. Now, India has protected its sensitive sectors when it comes to the complete CETA, whether it is dairy sector, the cereals, pulses, vegetables, gold and jewelry, and the smartphones also. They had been protected from any immediate liberalization, or you can say any immediate slaying of the tariffs which will be there. Now, this is quite important because when it comes to CETA, so this has been described by the Commerce Secretary as one of the most ambitious FTAs that India had signed, and ultimately there are 30 chapters which had been included beyond the tariffs as well. They are the chapters which actually include the digital trade, the government, procurement, the labor, the environment as well, and the gender also. Now, this is quite important because this is India's strategy where India is moving ahead through the bilateral trade agreements. And this is the selective and the deep bilateral deals that we are talking about. We had the similar deals that are there with India and UAE. We have the comprehensive economic partnership agreement with India and Australia as well, and with the India and EFTA also. Now, DCC is also quite important because there was a long-standing, demand that was there from the Indians, because ultimately the Indians, they were contributing to two sides. All right, so they had to contribute to the national insurance contributions which are there in the UK, and ultimately it was like a sunk cost because they were paying at both the regions. In India as well, they were paying in the UK, and therefore DCC is quite important. Now you can link this with the MFN principle, that is there, or most favored principle or nation principle, and even with the FTA, that is free trade agreement exceptions, and even you can link this with India's China plus one positioning, that is against the global supply chain that we are talking about. So again, this is quite important news, and this CETA, it will enter into the force today. Now this is quite important over here because when you see the implications, so you can see that there is, or it deepens the India-UK strategic partnership as the post-Brexit Britain pivots through or towards the Indo-Pacific region. And now Indo-Pacific is quite important for India too as well, because ultimately there is the counter-Chinese policy that we are talking about when it comes to Indo-Pacific region. Then also it opens the near total UK market access for the Indian goods while facing India's own liberalization to protect the domestic industry that we have. Also, it is quite important because this has been framed by the government as the benefiting farmers, the fisher folk and the women entrepreneurs as well, through the expanded export opportunities that will be provided to these people. And also there is an environment chapter that had been included. So this addresses the sustainability commitments from both the sides within the trade framework, and also this is quite important ethically because this balances the free trade gains with the fairness to India's smallholder farmers and even the informal sector workers through the sensitive sector carve-outs that had been there. So therefore this is quite important ethically also. All right, good morning Pradeep. If the CETA binds us to rigid global sustainability metrics, it directly limits our policy autonomy to manage industrial transitions on our own timeline, right? All right. So over here we have the next important news that we have, and this is Supreme Court suggests temporary prayer space for the Bhojshala complex. Now this is quite important because when it comes to Supreme Court have decided over here or declined to restore the status quo ante after the Madhya Pradesh High Court order or the 15th of May that declared that Bhojshala Kamal Mola complex is basically a temple that is dedicated to goddess Saraswati. Now here the High Court had quashed a decades-old ASI order which had actually permitted the Muslims to offer the Friday prayer or namaz at the site, and the Supreme Court have asked Madhya Pradesh to identify an open space that is near the disputed site for the Friday namaz between 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. as an ad hoc measure till there would be the final disposal of the complete the issue. Also, the bench have barred any structural alterations that can be done to the disputed structure without its permission and issued notice to the state and the union government as well related to the same. So now this is again about when it comes to the petitioners. So this is all about the law that is there, and this law is basically the Places of Worship Special Provision Act that was passed in 1991. Now, according to this act, what is there is that any place of worship that was there and its religious character, it was, frozen. It was frozen, and the religious character was as per the 15th of August 1947. But please remember over here that Ayodhya is one-time statutory exception that has been laid down into the complete law. Reshma, good morning. All right, so this is quite important, but when it comes to ASI, the Archaeological Survey of India, it is the custodian of the protected monuments which are there under the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act 1958. Now, it has historically managed the access arrangements that are there at the complex. And according to this, there had been, there was a kind of, you can say, arrangement that was made by ASI, where both the sides, they were, they were granted the permission to offer the prayers at the same site. All right. But at the same time, the Hindu community, they regarded the Bhojshala as the temple of goddess Saraswati, and the Muslim community, they referred to this as the 11th century monument, that is the Kamal Maula Mosque. And thereby there are the stakes that we are talking about both the religious identities, and this relates to Article 30, 25 and 26 basically, which provides us with the freedom of religion, and it also relates to secularism, which is basically the basic structure as has been defined by the Supreme Court itself, and also the prior disputed side jurisprudence, that is where this complete matter it links to. Now this is quite important because when it comes to the political aspect of the complete scenario, so there is the disputed religious sites. Now they remain the flashpoints for the communal polarization and for the electoral mobilization as well, and that is why it links to political aspect. Now when it comes to the economic aspect, you can see that the heritage and the pilgrimage tourism, that carries economic stakes for the local, their economy regardless of the outcome as well, and it relates to the social perspective because this tests India's capacity for the peaceful and law-governed coexistence between the communities over a shared historical site. Now this is quite important environmentally as well because conservation of the centuries-old protected monument that falls within the ambit of the ASI's environmental heritage mandate. And also there is the ethical perspective where it weighs the judicial restraint and the constitutional value of the fraternity against the urgency each community feels regarding its faith claim, and thereby there is an ethical perspective or dilemma also that you can relate the complete news to. Now, in the next news, we have the three-language formula that had been, questioned by the Supreme Court itself. Now, the Supreme Court have questioned the CBSE's 10th of July circular, which have categorized English as a non-native language under the new three-language formula that had been proposed by the CBSE. Now, the bench have asked whether the English, which is used officially for the at least 5 of the states in over 300 years, that can be considered as the indigenous Indian language or not. Now the petitioners, they have flagged that there is a severe resource crunch. The schools would need up to 22 additional teachers if all scheduled languages were to be made available to the students. And even the CBSE's affidavit, it said that the retired teachers and the qualified postgraduates, they could be engaged for the three-language formula, and ultimately that 99.9% of the schools, they already have at least one of the Indian language teacher that are there. So over here, this is again quite important because here the Supreme Court have asked whether we can consider the English as the native language or not. Now when it comes to the complete scenario, so there was Kothari Commission that was formed in 1968, and ultimately that gave the recommendation that there should be the three language that should be taught to the students. Now this had been a recurring flashpoint, especially when it comes to Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu had NT in the agitations, and there you can relate this to because ultimately this is quite politically you can say sensitive issue that we are talking about. Now, ultimately, when it comes to the NEP 2020, so it had revived the complete three-language formula and then reframed it as well. Now, this requires that class 9th and 10th students, they should study at least 2 of the languages which are native to India under the CBSE's current scheme. And ultimately, this relates to the constitutional provisions which we have under the Articles 343 to 351. Basically, they addresses the official language use and even the promotion of the linguistic minorities, which is distinct from the school curriculum mandates. Now, this also links to the 8th schedule that we have, where we have 22 of the languages, which are basically the official languages, and then it relates to the federalism and even the education, because ultimately education is the concurrent list subject, and thereby this is quite important. Now over here, when it comes to the complete perspective, it does not relate to the environment. So over here, we have the political perspective where it actually reignites the center and state friction that is over the language policy, especially when it comes to the non-Hindi speaking states which are wary of the imposition of Hindi in these states. Also, this is quite important economically because implementing the formula nationally, it will require significant new teacher recruitment and the teacher or the training investment as well. Now, this is also important because this raises the questions of the linguistic identity, the inclusivity and the English roles as a vehicle of the social and economic mobility. Now, this is quite important ethically as well, because ultimately over here it weighs the right to mother tongue education. Alright, that is against the practical value of English as a widely used administrative and the aspirational language again. So over here this is about the ethical perspective also. Now, this is quite important because ultimately when it comes to the CBSE, so there is a flexible staffing approach that had been taken by the CBSE, which is quite commendable. Like for example, it has said that retired teachers, they could be, they could be inducted, we could have postgraduates, and there could be hybrid or the virtual classes as well. Now, this is quite pragmatic bridge that you will see, and ultimately this should not become a permanent substitute for the real capacity building that should be there in the school education. Also, when it comes to Supreme Court's, integration of the word native, it actually cuts to the deeper truth that we are talking about. Now, language policy debates, they often rest on the contested and colonially inherited, categories, and thereby this is quite important that when it comes to the language or English being termed as the native language, this also has the roots that can be taken to the colonial era as well. Now, there is also genuine multilingual education. Ultimately, this will succeed only when the implementation matches the ambition. Right now, when it comes to the surveyed CBSE schools, so there are only 47.3% of them which are fully compliant. So how can we have the multilingual education which could be implemented when we have the schools which are still not ready with the implementation itself? And again, this is a cooperative federalism approach that should be taken. Alright, when it comes to the language, when it comes to anything that has to be imparted, so that has to have a kind of, cooperative federalism or kind of cooperation that should be done between the center and the state, and this should not be a top-down mandate that should be there, and ultimately there is, there are the chances that this may lead to the language politics as well. So thereby, this is quite important politically also. Now, coming to the next important article that we have, it is in the editorial, and this is Steady and Turbulence. This is about the recent visit by Prime Minister Modi to New Zealand and Australia. So there was this visit to Australia and New Zealand, and ultimately that have produced a new India-Australia joint declaration on defense and security cooperation, where India and Australia, they have agreed to enhance the military cooperation, the interoperability, expand the joint exercises which are between India and Australia, and set up the annual Defence Ministers Dialogue and Maritime Security Collaboration Roadmap as well. Now, when it comes to the Australia have also allowed uranium exports for India's civilian nuclear program, and this have removed the long-standing obstacle that was there between India and Australia as well. Now, when it comes to India and New Zealand, they have elevated their ties to the strategic partnership with a 4-year roadmap, and that includes Navy NZDF logistic cooperation and expanded the India-New Zealand FTA trade target for 2030 as well. So these are some of the outcomes that we have seen during the recent visit by Prime Minister Modi to Australia and New Zealand as well. Now, this is quite important because these visits, they are basically upon, or they builds upon the India's Act East policy that we have, and even the Mahasagar, that is mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth for all, or growth across the region. That is the vision that India has when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region. Now, this is also quite important because both partnerships, they fold into the India's stated commitment, which is free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Now, this is what we have seen during the recent visit of the Japanese Prime Minister as well. So this is alongside the Quad framework that we have with the US and Japan, and there is the supply chain diversification that we are talking about. We are also talking about the critical minerals access. Now, they have become urgent priorities amid the global economic and the geopolitical disruption that we have seen, especially when it comes to the West Asian crisis. Now, we have, or where you can link this news to the India's nuclear program. We have the 3-stage nuclear program where the third phase is quite critical. We have attained the criticality when it comes to the fast breeder reactor that is located at Kalpakkam. That was in this year itself. So again, this is quite important because we have attained the criticality at the 2nd stage, and now we'll be moving ahead to the 3rd stage of the nuclear reactor program, and ultimately that will be based upon the thorium. Now we have the thorium reserves which are found in the monazite sand, which is basically, you can see the monazite sand that is there in the coastal beaches, and ultimately that would be used in the third stage of the reactors that we will have in India. So this is all about the 3-stage of the program that we have for the nuclear reactors. Indo-Pacific Initiative as well, where you can connect this, and the Quad cooperation that we have with the nations. Now this is very important because securing the uranium supply from Australia, this is very quiet, but at the same time a consequential win for India, because it will materially de-risk India's civil nuclear plan expansions as well. Also, when it comes to these partnerships, they exemplify the India's multi-alignment approach that we have. Now we are moving towards the multi-alignment with the different nations. We are moving towards the bilateral partnerships, and that is what India is moving ahead with. So there is the deepening ties with the multiple powers without any kind of the alliance commitments which are there. So this is quite important, because this is the multi-alignment approach that we are seeing when it comes to India. Also, when it comes to the real test, it will be about converting these declarations. We can make the declarations, but then converting these declarations into the real operational outcomes, that is quite important, whether it is joint exercises, the roadmap milestones, or the trade target delivery by 2030 as well. Now also this is quite important, because India must keep building the partnership network to hedge against both the US unpredictability. We cannot predict US stance till the time Donald Trump is in the power. Alright, so we must move towards building the partnership, or towards the multi-alignment approach, and even we are seeing the Chinese assertiveness. There was a news just day before that I was reading. It was about the South China Sea again. Alright, so again the China is asserting its power over the Indo-Pacific region, and we have the US which is quite uncertain. We are not certain about anything about US, what US will do under the Donald Trump. So therefore this is quite important that India must build the multi-alignment approaches towards the various nations which are there. Did we give up any dairy protection to New Delhi? No, that we have not done. Alright, so ultimately when it comes to dairy and the agriculture sector, so we are not opening these sectors to any of the foreign nations yet, and that is the stance that the government has taken, whether it is about the trade deal with the US that is being negotiated. Alright, the major the major problem when it comes to India and US trade deal is about agriculture and the dairy sector. So we have not opened it, and that is why the negotiations have failed considerably over a large period of time. And at the same time, when it comes to the various CETA, CEPA, or any of the free trade agreement that we have signed, again the dairy and the agriculture sector, they have been put into the exceptions, and they have not been opened for the direct trade. Alright. Now coming to the next news that we have, it is India-US defense ties. Big ambitions but little delivery. Again, quite important article that is here. Again, that is what I was saying, that it is good that you make the declarations, but then these declarations, they have to be put into the operation to become realized. So over here, this article, actually this editorial, it talks about the negotiations that were over the GE's F414 fighter engine. Now this is the centerpiece of the ISET, that is initiative on the critical and emerging technologies that is between India and USA. Now this partnership was there, and ultimately this remains stalled. Per engine cost has nearly tripled to over 200 crore rupees, and that is quite concerning. Now GE is basically seeking an Indian investment of about $800 million, that is nearly about 7,576 crore rupees, to set up the dedicated production line. There are the disputes which are there related to the technology transfer and the intellectual property rights as well. So these are unresolved as yet. Now there were the past initiatives that were there between India and US, basically in the the defense sector or the defense technology sector. So there were DTI that was there in 2012, then ISET in 2022, and then Indus X that was there in 2023. Now when it comes to all these platforms which had been signed, or these deals which were signed between India and US, they have promised the transformation, but again they have delivered the limited industrial outcomes that we can see. Now we have the 3.5 billion MQ-9B drone deal as well. Now this is quite important because ultimately there will be, or this resemble that there is a straightforward purchase rather than the co-production that was originally envisaged, and thereby this is quite important when it comes to the trade ties or the defense ties that are there between India and US. They have not materialized as they should have been. Now, like I said that ultimately since 2002, we have the India that have acquired more than $22 billion in the US defense equipment, but there is no co-production, there is no technology transfer, and this again remains quite limited. Now, the US treats the advanced defense technology as the strategic asset. Alright, we have seen not just about the advanced defense technology, we have seen this in the case of the AI as well, where actually US have mandated Anthropic not to release its advanced version of the Claude to the global regime. So again, over here when it comes to the technology, and especially when it comes to defense technology, the advanced technologies which are there, so they actually treat it as a strategic asset which is governed by the export control regimes, like for example ITAR, that is International Traffic in the Arms Regulation, and India over here seeks that these technologies should be there, or it should be transferred to India, so that basically we can build the indigenous capabilities under the Atmanirbhar Bharat for the programs like for we have Tejas Mark II, or even the MK twin engine fighter that will be the 5th generation aircraft that we will have in India. Now this is quite important because ultimately there had been 2 decades of DTTI, that is Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. Then we had the ISET that was signed in 2022. Then INDEX-X, that is India US Defense Accelerator Ecosystem, in 2023. Now this shows ultimately that there is a pattern. There are the declarations which move fast between both the countries, but the industrial delivery, it actually moves very, very slow. Or the industrial participation or the cooperation, or when it comes to that technology transfer, that does not happen, and India must recalibrate the expectations accordingly. Now there is also the proposed RDPA, that is Reciprocal Defense Procurement Agreement between India and USA. Now when it comes to this, it will expose India's nascent defense manufacturers, because ultimately there will be reciprocal, but this may not be reciprocal ultimately, because there will be direct competition with the large manufacturers which are there in USA, and we do not have that much of the reliant, or you can say the large defense manufacturers in India, and this reciprocity the reciprocal the agreement that is there, it will not lead to the parity between the Indian defense manufacturers and the US defense manufacturers which are there. Also, India should prioritize the depth over the breadth also. There should be fewer, but then there should be better negotiated technology transfer deals rather than proliferating into the alphabet soup of the frameworks that we have, whether it is ISET, whether it is INDEX-X or DTTI. So these are just some of the alphabets that we are using, but ultimately they are not giving us the actual thing that should have been given. That is the transfer of the technology, or even the co-production that had not been achieved yet in India. Ultimately, Atmanirbharta in defense, it will depend upon the sustained domestic research and development investment than on any single foreign partnership. That is again a very important lesson that India must learn, and we must invest into the research and development in the defense sector. Now coming to the next news that we have, it is again quite important. It is, I told you that this is about the Supreme Court, which have weighed that there should be SOP for the urgent cases affecting the life and liberty, where actually there is a petition that had been filed, and it says that it must allow the citizens to knock on the doors of the court anytime, or day or night, in case affecting the life and liberty, including illegal detentions and imminent demolition of the homes, deportations, custodial violence, or any other state action. Now this is quite important because ultimately this is, or where it comes to the fundamental rights regime. So over here there will be a SOP that will be considered by the Supreme Court, and let's say that how this SOP will be released. Now there is another important news which actually is important for your prelims or for your mains as well, but majorly for your prelims. In mains you could be asked about the paraquat also. So over here when it comes to the center, it has notified the ban on the paraquat dichloride. Now, this is a herbicide which is linked to the thousands of deaths, which is due to self-harm, homicides, and the accidental deaths that have happened in India. Now, this is quite important because ultimately this is after this had been banned by Andhra Pradesh. And when it was banned by Andhra Pradesh, I told you that this is quite harmful herbicide that we are talking about, and this is where this is used to clean up the complete land after the the harvest. Again, quite important. Now, coming to the next one, it is about acid indigestion included in the Amendment Act, and that is been said by the Center to the Supreme Court. Now, we are talking about the Rights of Person with Disabilities Act of 2016. Now, this will also include the acid attack victim, where it will mean the person who have internal injuries caused by the ingestion of the acid or any other similar corrosive substances. Now, over here, these amendments, they will be in effect retrospectively. Now, with retrospective effect, that means that it will allow the victims with the internal injuries that occur before 22nd May 2026 to also claim the benefits under the 2016 Act. And again, this is quite important news that we have for today. So these are the important articles that had been featured in our today's The Hindu, and that will be all. Now we'll be moving ahead towards the question and answers time. Jai Hind, Tanmoy. Now the first question that we have is with reference to the newly operationalized India United Kingdom CETA and the DCC, consider the following. Under the CETA, the UK will immediately eliminate the tariffs on 100% of its tariff lines for the Indian imports. Under the DCC, Indian workers posted temporarily in the UK are exempt from paying social security contribution in the UK for a period up to 5 years, provided the contributions are being made in India. Then India has immediately eliminated tariffs on over 80% of its trade value, including sensitive sectors such as dairy and smartphones. So what will be the right answer? So right answer is B, that is true. That is the first and the third statement, they are incorrect, and we have the second only which is correct. Moving to the next one, we have with reference to the trial in absentia under the section 356 of the newly enacted BNSS, consider the following statement. A trial in absentia can be conducted for any accused person who has evaded arrest for more than 90 days. Then it is applicable only to individuals declared as proclaimed offenders under the law for offences punishable by imprisonment of 10 years or more, life imprisonment and or death. Then the court is mandated to appoint a defence advocate at the state's expense to represent the absent accused. So what will be the correct answer? Right, so over here I'm getting A as the right answer. No. Alright, over here it is said any accused person, but the right or the trial in absentia is only for the proclaimed offenders. It is only for the proclaimed offenders and not for any accused person. So thereby the first statement is incorrect because it is straightly in contradiction to the second statement. The second statement is correct, and then we have the third as well, that is correct. So we have B, that is 2 and 3 only, that will be correct one. Alright, Reshma. Now coming to the next one, consider the following statements regarding the regulatory framework for the forced labour imports in India. Now, India's recent ban on the forced labour imports defines forced labour based on the International Labour Organization Forced Labour Convention 1930 number 29. Then the inquiry into the use of forced labour in imported goods is conducted by the NHRC, that is National Human Rights Commission. Then prior to this trade notification, India relied primarily on domestic labour and the criminal laws to address the forced labour issues. So again, there is this news that is there in our today's edition, The Hindu, and this is about the forced labour imports in India. And again, this is quite important because it is as per the the India and US trade that actually demands this framework that should have been there. And thereby over here, when it comes to this particular issue. Yes, we have the answer, that is B again. That is 1 and 3 only. The second one is incorrect, and we have first and third that are true. All right. Now coming to the next one, which of the following geographical features are transited when moving from a Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman? Now over here we have Musandam Peninsula, we have Strait of Hormuz, then Abu Musa Island and Chabahar Port. So select the correct answer using the code given below. So which will be the geographical features which a ship, it will be moving from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and you could be asked about the sequence as well. All right, that is how actually UPSC, it frames the geographical questions. So you can be asked about the sequence as well, that what would be the sequence. So the sequence will be, it will be first Abu Musa Island. So from Abu Musa Island it will be moving towards, there will be Musandam Peninsula and also the Strait of Hormuz, and then it will be crossing over. We do not have the Chabahar Port, which is actually there in the or when the ship, it will be transiting from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, because the Chabahar Port, it lies towards the eastern side. All right, so again we will have 1, 2 and 3. That will be the right answer for question number 4. Now coming to the next question, that is we have, with reference to the Places of Worship Special Provision Act 1991, consider the following statements. The first one is, it imposes a positive obligation on the state to maintain the religious character of all places of worship as it existed on 15th August 1947. Section 4, Clause 2 of the Act mandates that all pending suits or legal proceedings regarding the conversion of religious character of a place of worship shall abate. Then any place of worship which is an ancient and historical monument protected under the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act 1958 is completely exempt from the provision of the 1991 Act. So, which of the statement given above are correct? What will be the correct answer here? No. Over here, all the statements are true. Yes, the sites, the monumental sites which are there under the AMASR Act, that is Ancient Monument and Archaeological Site and Remains Act 1958, they are completely exempt from the provision of the 1991 Act. So therefore, we have third as well true, we have second and one also true. All the statements which had been mentioned are true here. Now coming to the mains practice, you can practice these two questions which are from our today's The Hindu. First one is, evaluate the administrative and constitutional challenges of establishing a 24/7 standard operating procedure or SOP for the emergency judicial access in India. To what extent can digital courts and e-filing portals democratize access to justice in cases involving imminent threats to life and personal liberty? And then second one, we have the simultaneous enforcement of the India, UK, CETA and the DCC represents a structural transformation in India's global trade architecture. Critically examine how this dual framework balances export opportunities for labor-intensive manufacturing with cost reductions for professional service providers. So these are the two questions that you can try for your mains examination. Now once again, let me tell you that today is the last day. Today you are getting the lowest price drop, and ultimately you can enroll into any of the courses that are available on the platform of StudyIQ IS with the code that is BRS Live. And when you will use this code, you will find that you will have the lowest price that will be available for the courses that are there. So that would be all in today's session. Thank you very much guys for joining me over here on the platform of StudyIQ. I will see you tomorrow at the same time, that is at 9:30 a.m. and again we'll be discussing the important articles which had been featured in tomorrow's The Hindu. So that would be all. See you Apex and everyone, Cloud Shinobi, Reshma, and thank you very much. Alright, Political Science, thank you, and do not forget to like the session, share the session with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss any of the future updates. Thank you, bye bye, take care and Jai Hind. Have a good day. Bye.